didn't argue, I didn't plead. I just stood in the kitchen doorway watching my mother write a check for my sister's first month of residence at Queen's University, and I understood, in that moment, that the conversation was already over. My sister, I'll call her by what she was to me then, the favorite, sat at the table flipping through a brochure for student housing like she was picking a hotel. She was 19. I had been 19 2 years before, and when I'd sat at that same table with a university acceptance letter from Dalhousie, my father had folded his hands and said, very calmly, that they believed in independence, that I needed to learn to stand on my own, that life didn't hand you things. My sister didn't need to learn any of that, apparently. I want to be fair. I spent years trying to be fair about this. My parents weren't monsters. They went to church. They brought casseroles to sick neighbors. My mother volunteered at the library. But there was something in the way they saw me. The older daughter, the one who looked like my father's difficult sister, the one who asked too many questions, that made them decide, somewhere along the way, that I needed a harder road. And my sister, soft-voiced and easy to please, needed protecting. They didn't say any of this out loud. They didn't have to. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ontario, the kind of place where everyone knows roughly what your family earns by where you live and what hockey league your kids play in. We were comfortable. My father was an engineer with a municipality. My mother worked part-time at a dental office. There was money. There was enough money for one daughter's entire university education, a used car at 18, a graduation trip to Portugal. There just wasn't enough for both of us. Or so I was told. When my acceptance letter came, I had a plan already built. I'd applied for OSAP. I'd looked into a work-study program. I'd found a shared house 3 blocks from campus with 2 other students and a landlord who didn't mind if you paid rent a few days late during exam periods. I sat down with my parents and walked them through all of it. I wasn't asking for everything. I was asking for help with the gap. Maybe $4,000 or $5,000 a year, the part that the grants didn't cover, the part that would keep me from graduating with debt that would take a decade to clear. My father listened to the whole presentation. Then he said, "We think you're capable of doing this yourself. That's a compliment, you know." My mother nodded. She looked almost proud of him for saying it. I drove back to the university town alone that September in a car I'd bought with 2 summers of waitressing money. It had rust along the rear wheel wells, and the heat only worked on the passenger side, but it ran. I moved into that shared house. I worked 20 hours a week at a cafe near campus. I went to every class. I ate a lot of pasta and a lot of whatever was on sale at the No Frills on Thursday afternoons. I called home sometimes. The conversations were short. My mother would tell me about my sister's volleyball tournament, the new sectional sofa they'd ordered, a trip they were planning to see my aunt in Victoria. I'd tell her I was fine. She'd say good, and mean it, and hang up. I wasn't fine, not all the time, but I was managing. And managing started to feel like something I was actually good at. In my 3rd year, something shifted. Not in my family. They stayed exactly the same. It shifted in me. I stopped feeling like I was surviving and started feeling like I was building something. I changed my major to accounting. I was good with numbers. I'd always been good with numbers. My professors noticed. One of them pulled me aside after a particularly strong midterm and asked if I'd considered the CPA stream. I hadn't. Not seriously. She said I should. I graduated with distinction. I had student loan debt of just over $31,000, which is not nothing, but it is manageable if you are disciplined and you do not buy things you cannot afford and you treat every extra dollar as a payment. I got a job at a mid-sized accounting firm in Toronto before convocation. I did not tell my parents I was moving to Toronto. I sent them a postcard when I got there. I thought that was funny. My mother did not think it was funny. The years that followed were not glamorous. I shared a 2-bedroom apartment in Scarborough with a colleague named Priya for the first 2 years. I took the 54 bus. I packed my lunch every single day. I studied for my CPA designation on evenings and weekends while Priya watched reality television in the next room, and I pretended that was background noise that helped me concentrate. Eventually, it actually did. I passed my exams on the first attempt. My firm promoted me. I was 27 and I had a real salary and a small amount of savings, and I had not asked my parents for a single dollar since I was 19 years old and walked out of that kitchen. My sister called me around then. It was the first time she'd called me directly. Usually communication went through my mother, and her voice was different than I remembered. Older, a little flat. She told me she was getting married. His name was Trevor. She'd met him at a work event in Kitchener, where she was now living. He was in real estate. She was excited, she said, and then she paused in a way that made the excitement sound like a script she was reading. She asked if I would come to the wedding. I said I would think about it. I did think about it. For about 3 weeks, I thought about almost nothing else. I hadn't been home in 2 years. I hadn't been in the same room as my parents in longer than that. The last time I'd seen my mother was at a cousin's birthday, briefly, in a church hall where she'd hugged me and said I looked tired and asked if I was eating enough, in a way that was almost tender, but contained within it a complete absence of curiosity about my actual life. She didn't ask about my job. She didn't ask where I was living. She asked if I was eating. I decided to go, not for reconciliation. I was not going for reconciliation. I was going because my sister had asked me herself, directly, and that meant something. And because I had built something in the years since I left, and I was not ashamed of it, and I was no longer willing to be absent from my own family's milestones out of the fear of being made to feel small. I drove from Toronto to the venue in my own car, a 2021 Honda Civic with no rust and heat that worked everywhere, and I wore a dress I'd bought at a boutique on Queen Street that cost more than I would have spent on a week of groceries at 22, and it fit perfectly, and I felt steady. The reception was at a renovated barn venue outside Stratford. String lights, exposed wood beams. The kind of place that costs a great deal to look effortlessly rustic. My parents had paid for most of it, I found out later. Of course they had. I arrived during cocktail hour. I got a glass of sparkling water and stood near the windows and watched the room settle into itself. My mother saw me from across the floor, and her expression did something complicated. Warmth and something else underneath it, a kind of reassessment, which I recognized immediately and did not let land. She came over and hugged me. She said I looked well. She said it in a way that communicated surprise. My father shook my hand. He said, "You made it." Like I had arrived at a conference rather than my sister's wedding. I smiled. I said, "I did." I found my seat at a table near the back. Family, but the outer ring of it. An aunt and uncle I liked, a cousin with a new baby, two of my sister's friends from university who were warm and asked about Toronto and seemed genuinely interested when I told them where I worked. I began to relax a little. And then I saw Trevor. I had not met him before. I had seen one photo on my sister's social media taken at a ski hill somewhere. He looked like someone who had always been slightly more handsome than he was interesting and had built a personality around making that work. In person, he was taller than I expected, wearing a well-fitted suit, moving through the room with the ease of a man who assumed he belonged everywhere he stood. He was coming toward our table to greet people, working the room in that particular way some grooms do, warm and performative, hand extended. And then he stopped. He had been mid-sentence with my uncle, laughing at something, and he stopped. His eyes had found me, and his face did a thing that I've replayed many times since. It didn't go pale exactly, it went still, the way a face goes when the brain is running faster than the body can manage. The laugh was still there for half a second, and then it wasn't. My uncle didn't notice. He kept talking. Trevor recovered quickly. He's smooth, I'll give him that. But I had seen it. You notice things when you've spent years paying close attention because no one was paying attention to you. He came around the table. He shook hands with my cousin, said something kind about the baby, turned to me. "This is my niece," my aunt started. "She came all the way from—" "We've met," Trevor said. His voice was even, but his jaw wasn't. "Have we?" I said. And I genuinely had to think for a moment, because I meet a lot of people in my work and I am careful but not infallible. And then it came. 2 years ago, A file that had come across my desk at the firm, not my client. I had been brought in to assist a senior partner on an audit, a numbered company with inconsistencies in its reporting, a real estate holding structure that had been arranged very creatively to obscure certain income flows. We had flagged it. The file had been referred. The numbered company had a director I had seen named in the documentation. The director's full legal name was Trevor William Holt. I had not been the one to make the referral. I had been, in the professional language, a junior contributor to the file. But I had seen his name, and I had signed the internal memo. My name was in the documentation, and he clearly knew it. We looked at each other for approximately 3 seconds, and then my cousin said something about the seating arrangement, and the moment dissolved. He went back to greeting guests. He made it through the rest of cocktail hour and through dinner and through the speeches. He did not look at me directly again. My sister noticed nothing. She was radiant and distracted in the way brides are, swept along by the current of the day. My mother noticed something. Mothers usually do, even mothers who spend years not looking at you directly. I caught her watching Trevor's face during dinner with a slight vertical line between her eyebrows. After dinner, during the dancing portion of the evening, my sister found me. She'd had 2 glasses of wine and her cheeks were flushed and her hair was starting to escape its pinning, and she looked more like herself than she had in years. She hugged me hard, harder than I expected. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I'm really glad." I told her I was glad too, and I meant it. She pulled back and looked at me, and there was something shifting in her expression. "I know things were," she started, and then stopped and started again. "Mom told me about the tuition, about what they said to you. She told me last year. I didn't know the whole thing. I didn't say anything." I waited. "I was going to call you," she said. "I almost did like 6 times. I just didn't know how." "You called me about the wedding," I said. "Yeah," she nodded. Her eyes were bright. I figured that was a start. It was a start. I don't want to make this into something it wasn't. One conversation at a wedding reception doesn't undo 8 years, and she knew that, and I knew that, and neither of us pretended otherwise. But she had said I didn't know, and I believed her, and that mattered more than I thought it would. My parents came to find me near the end of the evening. My father looked like he wanted to say something and couldn't locate it. My mother said, "You've done well for yourself." And then, after a pause, "We should have done more. I think we should have done more. I think we should have done more." It was not an apology exactly. But from her, it was as close as I was likely to get, and I had stopped needing it years ago, which is the only reason I could receive it without either falling apart or dismissing it. "It worked out," I said, which was true. I drove back to Toronto that night. I didn't stay over. I had a drive, and I was fine. The highway was quiet and dark, and I kept the radio low, and I thought about the file with his name on it, and I thought about my sister's face when she hugged me, and I thought about the kitchen where my mother wrote a check for someone else's future while I stood in the doorway. I don't know what happened with Trevor and the regulatory matter. That wasn't my file, and professional ethics are professional ethics, and what I know within a very particular context. What I do know is that he saw my name in a document at some point and understood what it meant. And then he walked into his own wedding reception and found me sitting at a table with my family, and his face showed him something he couldn't entirely hide. I didn't do that. I didn't arrange it. I didn't plan it. I just showed up in a dress I paid for myself to a wedding I almost didn't come to, and life had arranged the rest. That's the thing about doing the hard work quietly for years and years. You don't always see the results coming. Sometimes you're just standing in a room and the results find you. My sister and I text now, not constantly, but regularly. She came to visit me in Toronto in the spring, and we walked along the waterfront and ate at a place on the harborfront that she said was too expensive and I said was fine because I was buying and I wanted to. She laughed at that, and I laughed too, and it felt, for the first time in a very long time, like having a sister. My parents and I are civil. That's what I have to say about that. It is civil, and it is real, and it is what it is, and I no longer need it to be more than that to feel whole. I paid off my last student loan installment 14 months ago. I transferred the funds on a Tuesday morning before a 7 a.m. call. I didn't celebrate. I just sat with it for a minute. $31,000, 11 years, a lot of no frills pasta. And then I made coffee and opened my laptop and went to work. Nobody handed me anything. I know that now, not as a wound, but as a fact about myself that I carry without bitterness. They wanted me to be independent. I am. It just didn't look the way they expected. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the wedding. Not Trevor's face going still when he recognized me. It's earlier than that. It's the kitchen. My mother writing that check without hesitation, without even looking up. And me standing in the doorway understanding, for the first time, that no one was coming to make this fair. I used to think the hardest part was the money. $31,000 in loans, 4 years of packed lunches, winters in a car where the heat only worked on the passenger side. But the money was never really the hardest part. The hardest part was doing all of it while knowing that somewhere across the province, my sister's tuition was being paid in full, and nobody in my family thought that required an explanation. What I've learned, not from a book, but from living it, is that how you respond to that kind of unfairness is the thing that actually shapes you. I could have collapsed inward. I could have spent a decade bitter and waiting for an apology that came in pieces and never quite completed itself. Some part of me did wait, for a while. But at some point, the waiting stopped feeling like strength and started feeling like a door I'd forgotten to close. So I closed it, not because I forgave everything, but because I needed both hands free to build something. What I built wasn't just a career, though the career matters and I'm not pretending it doesn't. What I built was a way of moving through the world where my integrity was the thing I could always account for. When that bile crossed my desk 2 years before the wedding, the numbered company, the irregular income flows, the name I didn't yet know would become my brother-in-law, I did my job. I flagged what needed to be flagged. I signed the memo with my name because it was right, not because I knew it would matter later. I had no idea it would matter later. That's not how doing the right thing works. You do it when no one is watching, when there's no obvious payoff, when it costs you something, or at least costs you the comfort of looking away. That's the only version of integrity that actually holds. And the intelligence piece. I want to be careful here, because I was never the smartest person in any room. But I was the one who paid attention. I read the documents. I asked the questions other people were too comfortable to ask. I noticed things, including Trevor's face at the cocktail hour, because I had spent years developing the habit of noticing. That habit came from necessity. It came from being in situations where no one was going to explain things to me, so I had to figure them out myself. I didn't know at the time that this was something worth cultivating. I just knew I couldn't afford to miss things. The part that took the longest to understand is the perseverance part, not just pushing through hard things. Anyone can white-knuckle their way through a bad year. I mean the slower, quieter version, showing up every single day for something that doesn't reward you immediately. That doesn't get easier quickly. That requires you to keep making the unglamorous choice over and over without applause. Packing the same lunch. Taking the same bus. Studying on a Friday night when Priya had the TV on and the world outside seemed to be happening without me. The check my mother wrote that day was for my sister. But in a way, I didn't understand until much later it was also for me. It put me in a position where I had to become someone who could stand in a room, any room, and know that everything I was wearing, everything I had built, everything that carried my name, I had earned. Nobody could take that from me. Nobody could revise the story. The work was mine. Trevor knew that when he saw me. That's why he went white. I drove home from that wedding in the dark with the radio low, and I thought, this is what it looks like when you do the right thing quietly for long enough. Not a scene, not a confrontation, just a moment where the room arranges itself and the truth is simply present. That's enough. It always was.